Welcome to the BiOptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. And now, here's your host, Wade T. Lightheart.
Want awesome health? How about doubling your energy? With our free Awesome Health course, you can get a new video and lesson every single day for 84 straight days. The course covers everything from optimizing your digestion, nutrient intake, correct health issues, including weight, skin, energy, immune system, and so much more. The course could easily be worth $200 or $300 for, and yet it's 100% free when you go to bioptimizer.com. That's bioptimizers.com. Once you're there, just enter your name and email to get the first 3 phases of the BiOptimization report. You'll get the report immediately and begin getting your video lessons each and every day from there on in. Good afternoon. It's Wade T. Lightheart here on the BiOptimizers Awesome Health Podcast, and I'm so excited today because I've got an amazing guest for you. He's a longtime friend of mine, a fellow holistic health practitioner, just a savant when it comes to diving deep and extracting the gold out of a really just an absolute ton of masters, and he's become one himself. Our guest today, Mr. Ronnie Landis. How you doing, buddy?
I am so good. I'm super excited to be here with you, Wade. I thank you for that introduction. That was fantastic. I appreciate that.
Now, for our listeners, of course, and I hate to steal anybody's thunder, so I'd rather for you to kind of describe who you are and what your path or your mission or what it is that you're doing in the world related to holistic health, because I know, or awesome health.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think it's important to contextualize that question for me is that I was raised as a martial artist. So from the age of 4, actually and this is a real story, my first conscious memory as a child was of the movie Enter the Dragon and of Bruce Lee. So that image of like a real life superhero, physical, mental kind of master of philosophy and master of the science of his own body and the dynamic expression, that like archetype was imprinted onto my consciousness from my very first memory. And so that really, I was raised as a martial artist and an athlete, as you know, and I walked down a path of eventually pursuing a professional career, both in basketball and taekwondo. I was an Olympic hopeful in the mid-2000s for Olympic-style taekwondo. And my whole dream growing up was to really, now I look back on it, it was really, there was a lot of like a need for significance and need to like represent or to explore my human potential. That's really what I feel like drove me. But the vehicle I used was martial arts and eventually became basketball as well. And I paralleled these 2 passions of mine to the point where it consumed every fiber of me. I looked through the lenses of those trajectories in every single thing I did, which, you know, when I look back, I made a lot of, I guess what you would call naive decisions. However, because when we're following our dreams, it's so real to us that it reinvents the world around us. And so I feel like that journey really laid a powerful kind of foundation for how I go about my life, which is really based on making the courageous decision, making the unpredictable decision, following synchronicity, and always going with where my heart is guiding me. So that's the way that I grew up. And the health thing came in when I was about 19 because I was looking to optimize my performance. As any athlete that gets into their adult years, you start to realize like, wow, okay, this is the prime of my athletic expression. And there's a little bit of wear and tear that's starting to creep up. And there's things that like the reality was like, okay, I'm eating crap and somehow I'm pulling it off, but I can already see that's not going to be sustainable. And so that's when I started to really reevaluate my food and lifestyle choices. And I realized that I need to start entertaining like organic food. And at that time, I had no understanding of vegetarianism or veganism, definitely had no idea about raw food. That, something of that kind of, if somebody had proposed that idea to me way back when, I just don't know if I would have even understood what they were talking about. But I slowly got into it. I started to get into whole foods. I started getting into grass-fed like chicken and bacon and stuff. I started getting into like raw milk. And then that's when what I believe really is my dharma, or a part of my dharma, is to really not preach or proselytize, but to be a role model for plant-based nutrition and living food nutrition. And that message really it got imparted to me a couple of years later when I had my second knee surgery. And then that was the moment where like just a lot of light bulbs went off, and I realized, okay, not only is my performance very important, but my recovery now is becoming the main focus of my life. I had 2 knee surgeries, and I didn't know how I was going to pursue my career after that. I was riding on fumes of faith. I didn't have any practical strategy. I didn't have the knowledge, but eventually through synchronicity, it started coming into my awareness. And then I found myself just eating fruit and eating vegetables and going to the farmer's market. And then eventually I started to get educated on, raw food nutrition. And I'll tell you what, the biggest epiphany for me that occurred that I think has shaped my direction moving forward was that I had been rehabilitating my knees for at least 3 or 4 years, like going to the physiotherapist and doing all the things necessary as I slowly started to upgrade my nutrition practices. But when I got the message of raw living foods and vegan nutrition at the time, it just hit me so deep where I just gave myself to it. I just went completely vegan, no animal products. I got into 100% raw food diet. I think I might have gotten into spirulina or something as well. And I got into barefoot grounding. That was the other thing. I started getting my anatomical alignment in my body and my spine and my hips, started to get that sorted out. And then I noticed in 30 days, I think it was exactly 30 days, I came back from a 5-mile run in the hills. And the weirdest thing about that, Wade, is that I had been scared to do running of that extent for a number of years. And it was something I loved doing. It was like a meditation for me, but I was always scared to do it. And I found myself in the hills running. I think I forgot that I was even in pain. I think that was really what it was. And I came back to the car. And after all the endorphins kind of weared out, I came back to reality, and I just noticed, I'm like, wait a minute, I'm not in pain. I remembered that I used to be in pain. And then I just realized, wait a minute, I started feeling my knees pressing on certain parts to see if there was like any, inflammation or anything. And it was the biggest aha moment. I realized, wow, my lot in life doesn't have to be that way. What has been doesn't have to be what's going to be. Like, I can change my destiny. And I understood that, but it was happening on a visceral level where I was feeling the reality of that principle. And that was the moment my life changed. I veered off the path of being an athlete over the next year. I kind of lost the fire for it, and I had to reevaluate my life. And then I just decided, okay, well, if I'm not going to do basketball or taekwondo, then I'm going to be an orator. I'm going to be one of the biggest speakers for this message in the world. And that's how I make decisions. If it's not overarching and super like inspiring, then it doesn't necessarily propel me. But that message propelled me, and that was almost 10 years ago. And I've been doing this thing ever since.
That's great. There's a lot to unpack. We've got Bruce Lee. We've got an athletic career. We've got a life-changing kind of physical situation. And going back to that, you said that you started to have these knee problems, I guess, when you were 19.
Yeah.
What was the time frame between when you kind of made the start of that journey to where you kind of came all in and left the athletic career? How long did that take for you?
That's a great question. So when I was 19, I had my first injury, and it was basically a wear and tear injury. I was just overtraining, and I didn't really understand the concept of rest and relaxing that much. So everything went into it to the point where my body started to fail me. And so from that point, it was about 4 to 5 years when it really came through. When I got my second knee surgery done, I healed that very quickly, and I went back into my training. But I would say a year into raw food is when I was still pursuing a professional career as a basketball player at this time. I was a week away from a training or a tryout session with one of the professional teams that was having a tryout at the Golden State Warriors gym in Oakland. Mm-hmm. And I have to tell you, that was a moment that taught me a lot about the paradox of life, because it was being handed to me, all this training, all this preparation, 3 workouts a day for 10 years. And at that moment, I'm a week away, and I just felt this this fire in me just kind of just watered down. And I came to a place where I told my coach, I said, I don't know what's going on. I've been on this nutrition journey, and I've been on the spiritual journey this last year, and I just can't do the tryout. Like, I don't have the fire. I can't step up to the plate. And somehow he got that, and it worked out. But there was a point where I just felt a little empty, because, you form an identity around being an athlete or spending your life doing something, and all of a sudden there's a fork in the road. So I'd say I slowly started to matriculate over, because I kind of knew where I was being led, but I had no practical strategy. I had no framework. I had no idea what I was going to do. And then I just decided, you know what, I'm going to write a book. I want to learn so deeply about my interest in nutrition that I'm just going to start writing books about it, because I figured, that's the best way to learn anything, right? Full engagement, full immersion. And I started doing that. And then eventually I decided, you know what, I better start speaking about this. I better start sharing this message and start creating a career for myself, because I knew I wanted to be a world-class speaker, speaking on the biggest stages. And so I was like, I better just get started. So
It's great. I love it.
Yeah.
That's a big change. So how old were you when you said to your coach, I lost the fire?
I think I was 20. I was 24.
And how long had you had that coach for? What was that relationship like? Because I know one of the things that we really advocate is coaching and the importance of coaching. It's a special role. What was that like for you to and how, just in your own words?
Yeah, no, taking me back through memory lane. It was well, I'll say it this way. He was my third coach in a string of basketball skill set coaches that I had over the course of about a year and a half. And he was really the one that was able to take me the furthest, because I had already created such a healthy foundation. I readjusted all my shooting and dribbling and all the things that I needed work with. So when I got to him, it was ready, and he was closer to my age. And he was a great basketball player himself. So and just a great guy. That was the main thing I realized. It wasn't just a basketball coach, but he was a really authentic and just a great man. He had a daughter, so he was a family man. And one of the things I got from him, more than just basketball, because he would push me to my limits, but I noticed that I was becoming a better person. I started thinking about things differently, because his life was a model of something at the time that I thought that I could probably adopt. Being a basketball trainer or an athletic trainer at the time, that made way more sense than what I do now.
Very, very interesting. You make an interesting point there. So, would you say that there was something from the coaching relationship that you developed that became more attractive than your sport, even though you might not have recognized it?
I totally. I was at that point in my life where it had to be more than just me. And it had to be about we. So if I was going to be an athlete, then I needed to use that vehicle as a way to inspire people. That was like the drive. Once I was like 21, 22, it started to take on this bigger kind of mission. But at that point, I think I realized that that wasn't going to be the way it was going to happen for me. It was more of like just like a really powerful dream. And I definitely deserved it. I worked for it, but it's just things happen. And I don't think I was really at the level I really thought or hoped I was to make that transition. So life intervened. And yeah, to your point, absolutely. Because the work I do now with clients, it's sacred. The coaching experience is a sacred relationship. And so I look back on reality and look back on my life, and I see where these seeds got planted, and have helped me become the person I am now.
That's amazing. I believe that too. I think that a coaching relationship is maybe one of the purest forms of human experience, because the relationship is totally based on one person imparting wisdom and helping the other one realize their potential. And I know you're really big into activating human potential, which we're going to go down there in just a minute. I guess for our listeners, we've got a little bit about your background, but you made this kind of pivot, and you kind of started off just doing an intuitive thing, but there must have been something that caused you to switch. Who was the person, or what was the event that got you to dive deep?
Yeah. Okay. Great question. So it was really a few people. I really got on YouTube, and I started looking at different people promoting various health messages. So at the time I got into Paul Chek's work, and I started diving into, and that was really powerful at the time. And then eventually I got tuned more towards the vegetarian path, and my now friend, Marcus Patrick, who, he's just like a physical specimen if there ever was one. And he had a similar spiritual kind of shift from getting into raw food nutrition. And so he began prophetizing, right, all over the internet. And so he started making personal videos that really influenced me a big time. But then ultimately the biggest catalyst has been David Wolf. I think you know that about me too. Like, he's just been the most consistent, powerful voice for this message that I've really leaned on so much, as far as, sourcing information and my own interest of becoming like a real researcher. Like, I figured that if I really wanted to master this thing, I need to look to other people that have mastered it as well. And so he was a big part of it. And then there's a lot of different events and stuff. I went to an event in San Francisco, which was probably 2 years after getting into this whole thing, that he was speaking at. And that event that was the first time I got to meet him, which was great. But more powerfully, I got to meet so many people in that industry that many of them are now some of my closest friends. So I think that power of community, like, I've been doing this on my own. So finally it was like, oh, wow, you mean there's other people out there that are doing this? So that right there kind of, I think that was the biggest catalyst for me.
That's a great, you make a great point there, I think, for people to listen, because I think events can really change lives. And of course, we live in a digital world. And I always say we're sometimes the most disconnected, generation of humanity to this point. And maybe it's moving towards something else, which I believe. But let's talk about events and individuals and the power of that. And would you say that was the event that kind of galvanized you and said, I want to be that speaker. I want to be on that stage. Totally. I want to be an upstanding member in that. Can you describe what that felt like for you? Because now, how old are you at this time?
I was about 25 or 26, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That, when I think back on that moment, that night, there were so many off the wall synchronicities. There was even paranormal phenomena that was occurring in front of me, kind of like seeing a new veil of reality. That night was just outrageous, really. But I think really what it did for me, not on a conscious level, but I think I left that night feeling very inspired and feeling very grounded in the direction that I had chose. And I got a new level of my own potential. I realized, like, wow, okay, I could do that too. I could be in front of crowds like this, and I could have a bunch of like, vendors. Like at that event, there was Sun Warrior I met for the first time. There was Sacred Steve Adler, Sacred Chocolate. I met him for the first time. He's become one of my closest friends. Many other people. So it just awoke this reality of like, wow, this is a real career. Like I can actually do this as a real career. I definitely planted that seed.
So you're 26. You've kind of found your feet, so to speak. You've kind of found a path. You found a community. You've decided this is what I'm going to do. You decide to write a book. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How long? I mean, a book is a monstrous endeavor, and I know your first book was a monster. Like, how do you go? You're obviously an extreme guy. Tell me about what that journey was like.
Wow, quite a journey, because there's been lots of reinventions along the way, right? Like, so the first edition that I ever put out was this very small little book called Activating the Superhuman. I think it's still available on Amazon. It shouldn't be, but I think it's still floating around. It was this tiny little thing, but really what it was almost like a permission slip to myself that I could do this. And I just needed to get that momentum. I needed to see it in front of me. And then that book eventually became what at the time was called the Live It Lifestyle, Dropping Diets Forever. That was the original, like I would say that was the original book. And then that went into another edition, brand new cover. And then that turned into a brand new book called the Life Food Peak Performance System. You know that book very well.
It's a monster book and an amazing resource. You cover an incredible amount of territory in that book. We'll put that in the show notes as well. For our listeners, and if you're looking for a deep dive into a lot of realms, Ronnie goes deep, and it's a fun book.
Just to conclude that thought, that book became what is now what I consider my first real book. I feel like that was all just practice and preparation, and self-publishing allowed me the opportunity to practice in public. To make mistakes, to trip and fall, but to get used to being seen. And that allowed me to now show up in front of anybody or show up in front of hundreds to thousands of people fully seen. And so that book became what is now called the Holistic Health Mastery Program, which is 200 pages lighter, but it still like serves as the foundation of everything that I share.
This is great. So let's talk about the Holistic Health Mastery Program for a second. Who's it for? What's it about? Let's just start with who is it for first, and we'll get to the next questions later. I'll keep it one at a time.
Wow. Yeah, well, I have a difficult time taking the traditional model of like choosing your avatar type of like kind of marketing. What I realized recently, actually, I realized that everything that comes through me is first and foremost for me, and who it's for beyond me tends to show up. So that's been an interesting thing that I've realized, is that I can't say it's for one type of person, but I can say that it's for those people very similar to me in terms of the aspirations that one has for their life. People that really want to know what their human potential is and want to expand the boundaries of health potential, of mental, emotional mastery, and obviously of their physiology and neurology, and really like become a master of this humanoid template we call a body.
That's a lot. So what does that encompass for our listeners? Like, what is if I'm kind of attracted to this, what am I going to get out of this course?
Cool. Okay. So the book and the course, well, first of all, the book is like kind of the inception for what became the Holistic Health Mastery course. And that came directly from a conversation that you and me had in Sedona many years ago, where I was literally just burnt out. I was on a book tour, promoting this book, and I ended up in Sedona. A relationship that I was getting into crashed and burned, and I had no way back. I just ended up in Sedona, and you happened to be there, and we got into a conversation at a coffee shop where you basically helped me see that I've already created such a huge foundation for myself that now is time to really step up and be more of an entrepreneur and actually serve people by creating an online platform for education. And so I want to say that because it's a great synchronicity in this conversation. But the actual program is all-encompassing, very comprehensive online video-based course that covers the spectrum of raw living food nutrition, plant-based nutrition, superfood nutrition, and tonic herbalism. And it goes into areas such as detoxification strategies, hormone balancing, neurological health, and many other areas. But really what it appears to me is that program, because of over 200 international students that we have in the program, I can use the people that are in it as a pretty good approximation. It's really for people that want to synthesize the best of the best information, strategies, and perspectives on this whole conversation of natural health and nutrition. And they want to synthesize it in a way that's easy to digest. It's easily accessible in the video-based format through our membership site, and also want support in their journey. So we also have a support group, an online Facebook private group, where there is tons of support. People get to ask questions. They get to feel empowered and supported on their journey, so they don't feel like they're just doing some online course all by themselves wherever they may be in the world.
That's an amazing resource. I love the power of the internet. And so are you facilitating this for this support group, or is that a self-directed group, or how's that work?
It's kind of become a self-directed group. I definitely am a part of it, and I facilitate. I check it whenever someone asks a question or something. I'm always scanning through. What I've noticed is that because so many of the other students are health coaches and they are naturopaths or whatever profession in the healing arts they're in, they tend to come in before I do and answer people's questions and help them and support them. And then if people tag me, I'll do my best to go in and really, give my 2 cents. But because of my other projects, in my personal coaching work, I'm not able to be on it 24/7 like I used to be. But I am definitely available, when need be.
So for someone who is maybe at that stage in their life where they're looking to make a shift, they're looking to make a difference, because you talk about a lot of things and some very advanced things. Right. Where does a person get started on their journey? If you had to do it all over again from where you did, what would speed that journey up for maximum efficiency, do you think? Or what are the basic tenets of what Ronnie Landis would say about how to activate your human potential?
Well, the number one, I think we'll both agree on this, is water. I found that hydration, just from a biological and cellular standpoint, hydration is the thing that keeps us going. There's like 10 layers of water molecules that surround our cells, and they become dehydrated over time. And then our cells basically shrivel away and can lead to mutations and different disease formations. And so much of that to me is really just demineralization and dehydration. And so I always get people started on water because that seems to be the thing that makes the most amount of shifts. And when I look at raw living food, one of the great things about it is that it's water-rich food, right? So when someone, drinks a green juice, or they have a cucumber or celery or water-rich fruit, they tend to feel better. Their brain is more clear. If they had heart or cardiovascular issues, those tend to improve. Blood sugar imbalances. Everything that's going awry in the human body is because we're out of balance. And we need to bring ourselves back into homeostasis. And I found that proper hydration, it is the thing, right? Everything else is like fish flakes in the water tank. And if you don't clean the water, then the fish flakes, aka the food, it doesn't have the charge, and it just doesn't work as well.
That's great. I found that it sounds almost so boringly easy. And when you're suggesting when people are making that transition, how much water do you have people drink?
Yeah. So I think water is such a fascinating subject, and you talk a lot about this as well. I'll tell you a story that I had, which actually imparted this realization into me, and then people can kind of like draw their own conclusions about what kind of water, where they want to go for that. I got really, being a student of David Wolf's for a while, I got into spring water, and I had never really, that made so much sense to me, but I never really considered that. And then I went on a site called findaspring.com with my buddy Hoy, and we became spring water fanatics. Like, we went to every spring we could find in Northern California and Marin and Sebastopol, and that whole, we would literally drive an hour out of the city just to go find a remote spring up like a mile up in a random hill. But it was so much fun. It activated some kind of naturalistic drive in me to connect back with nature. And finally, after days of trying to find this thing, we finally stumbled upon this spring in Mount Tamalpais in Marin County. And it was like, I don't know, it was like the heavens parted or something. Like, it's just water coming out of an aquifer, out of the womb of the earth, coming off this little rock. And it's like a little spout. And we just put our glass to it. And it was the sweetest tasting water I've ever had. And it really actually taught me something. I realized whoa, I've never ever had water before. I've never actually tasted what water naturally tastes like. And so for me, that became like a direct access to the information of nature as it was informing that water. So I'm a huge spring water kind of enthusiast. It's just kind of like a thing that I love.
That's great.
But there's so many different resources, and your question wasn't necessarily about what the best water is, but I would say as a general rule, find the best water you can find given your circumstances. That might be a particular type of filter, and you might need to remineralize it or recharge it, whatever the case may be. But my answer is 1 liter of water every morning. And sometimes the people are like, they look at me, they're like, whoa, that's a lot of water. And it's like, well, if you're not used to doing something, it seems like a lot, but the idea is that you're flushing out all the waste products and byproducts and acid crystals in the body and everything else, and you're freeing up the impactions that have built up through dehydration in the intestines. This is why colon hydrotherapy is so important for people, because it hydrates the intestines, right, and starts to dilute all that material. But the point is that you have to flush yourself out and then hydrate yourself before you start eating like solid food, especially if it's been cooked, broiled, toasted, whatever, because it's going to further dehydrate us. So I'd say like the number one conversation for anybody that's like really wanting to activate their potential is to drink 1 liter of water first thing in the morning.
And do you sip it out through the day, or are you focused on getting your water from foods mostly after that?
Yeah, well, where I'm at now is like most of what I consume is in a liquid form. Mm-hmm. I pretty much eat 1 meal a day. I'm technically fasting, not necessarily calorically fasting all day, but I'm on like a liquid type of diet. So what I do is I do the 1 to 2 liters in the morning for me, because my body I just find like I run better in a fasting state for at least the first part of the day. And then I'll have like maybe a green juice. I'll have an herbal tea or an elixir. And then I'll have some kind of smoothie at some point, right? So those are all liquid vehicles. And I feel like I get everything I need. And then when I want a little satiation, I want to ground, I'll have a big salad or something later in the day. But even the salad is pretty water rich as well.
Got it. So very, very high water rich diet. Yeah. And yeah, that's great. It seems like a lot of health guys, when they kind of get to a certain, and girls, they get to a certain level, that it becomes almost less is more. Would you say that's true?
Absolutely. And that wasn't the case when I first got into it, because I had like $100 smoothies. I'm tossing like 20, 30 ingredients in it. It's the marine phytoplankton. It's the blue-green algae, the spirulina, the cacao, the maca, the hemp seeds, chia seeds. I mean, like, everything I could get my hands on. And that was all great. I feel like that like saturated me. And then eventually I started to notice like, okay, I don't really need to eat 2 salads a day. I don't need to have these overarching extravagant smoothies anymore. It's actually, it's becoming about less is more. And I think that's because my microbiotic health is just improved so much through the years. And I've had some struggles with that too, as I've navigated the digestive transformation that I've gone through. It hasn't just been like, oh, I got into it and everything was perfect. Old things, like I guess maybe like intestinal wounds that I didn't even know about. The insulation strip started to leave me through cleansing. So now I was more sensitive to things like leaky gut. I was more sensitive to food allergies if I went off the reservation, had some grains or something. And then I had about a year journey where I had to actually repair my intestinal lining and study digestion so much, but it was the best situation ever because I became an expert in digestive conditions because I was also writing my book as I was dealing with this year-long issue that would take different forms. So I was obsessively looking into this stuff, and through my own personal journey, that section of the book, and it's something I talk about a lot, was born out of it. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, that's good. I want to dive a little deeper on this one. For example, do you feel that, because there's an old saying that you are what you eat, and I know with our company with BiOptimizers, we solve digestive issues, and we believe it's you are what you absorb. What have you learned about digestion in your journey and the importance of it, or where? And I'll add to that. And where people are compromised, or what you're seeing as a coach, and what are the trends that you're seeing?
Well, I've learned a lot about infectious organisms. I've learned a lot about things like candida and the various forms that it can manifest in. I've learned a lot about nanobacterium, calcification-causing organisms. I've learned a lot about viruses, pathogens, parasites. Like, I really got tuned into that world because my friend Dr. Robert Kassar was another person on the internet before we met and became friends. He was someone I studied a lot, and his whole thing was about like parasites. And I really he recommended a book to me called Parasite Rex.
I've read that book. It's a freaky book. It really can kind of freak you out.
Yeah. So that right there was that's always on the tip of my mind when it comes to digestive issues, because I don't think they're as simple as like, oh, you ate the wrong protein, you had a gluten protein, and it's wedged itself into the intestinal lining, and now you have whole proteins floating into your blood, and now you have Hashimoto's or some autoimmune condition like rheumatoid arthritis, whatever. Like, I definitely, obviously that's a catalyst or a trigger. But I think there's an inner terrain issue where certain organisms, like a bacterial infection, like a dysbiosis, occurs, and it occurs over the trajectory of one's life, right? If we look at, I don't know what the statistics are at the moment, but if we look at the amount of people that are antibioticized by routine when they're born, or their mother has an antibiotic and then they're breastfeeding and they don't have that immunological information like the mother's natural colostrum or natural probiotics to inform that child's immune system, then eventually if you look, I'll say it this way, Wade, there's so many different thoughts coming to me, but this is my basic assumption, is that everybody that grew up on a standard American lifestyle, including the medical interventions and the diet, have a dysbiosis or have had, if they haven't healed it. And a lot of the foods that people are eating are masking. They're cosmetically masking the symptoms that would alert somebody that they have an infection or they have a digestive compromise. That's kind of Can
you give an example of that? Because that's a pretty profound statement.
Yeah. Well, take it back to something like the probiotic intervention, right? What we know about, the antibiotic intervention. The word antibiotic basically means anti-life. And the word probiotic means pro-life, which is why I love your proteolytic probiotics. And that, by the way, just on a side note, the enzymes and probiotics have been extraordinarily influential in everything I do. I mean, way beyond just like digestive health, but it starts in the digestion. And that had become a huge tool for me in my own kind of healing process. But, I just look at it from a common sense perspective. When somebody starts to go on a healing path, like I just alluded about mine, and they start basically abstaining from all the byproducts of civilization, processed food, factory farm animal food, soda and tap water and all that stuff, then they start to wake up to their own sensitivities, and their body will start to alert them about their own digestive compromise or their immune system compromise.
So I'm going to go back, just pull back a little bit. So what would be an example where somebody is masking maybe a deeper condition?
Thank you. Constipation.
Do you find a lot of people are constipated?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's a secret though, right? Like people are very secretive about it. Like after a lecture or something, they might come up and be like, hey, I'm only going to the bathroom like once a day or once every 2 days. Or I've heard crazy things where people are only going like once a week.
Yeah. Medical doctors.
Absolutely. Deck doctors don't lie, right?
that's another great, that was another great book, audio.
Yeah. So that right there, if you want to get like right to the core of it, if you have like elimination issues, which I did, that's why I say that, because I'm using my own experience to reflect back what I believe, at least for me, that is true for most people, is that when you have issues eliminating, then that the transit is blocked up, right? So from that point, okay, there's something going on digestively that is out of balance.
And now for a BiOptimizers fixed digestion tip: supercharge your protein shake. Everyone knows protein shakes are a great way to sneak in extra protein, build more muscle, even replace meals and burn more fat. The problem is the highest quality protein typically absorbs at around 40%. One way to fix this and dramatically increase how quickly and effective your protein shake digests is to add 2 to 3 capsules of masszymes into your shake. One research study showed that pre-digested protein during a meal increased muscle growth significantly. To take advantage of this, just blend the open capsules into your shake, and within 15 minutes or less, the enzymes will have begun to break down the protein into amino acids. This can make your shakes at least 2 to 3 times more potent. Some people do this and sip on their shake while lifting to provide their muscles with a steady stream of amino acids during their workout. To save 10% on masszymes, use the code SHAKE10, that's SHAKE10, at masszymes.com. That's SHAKE10 at masszymes.com. If someone is listening to this, and how would they know what is, say, healthy elimination practices, like how many times a day versus not healthy? What, in your opinion, what would you say?
Yeah, well, from what I've read, there's kind of bare bones, I guess, data on what would be considered, how many times you should defecate every day. I think the simple answer is like 3 or 4, like really solid stools, right? And that's what I started to experience after I overcame my congestion issues and healed my gut. I started to have solid stools 2 to 3 to 4. Sometimes on a really amazing day, like 5 times a day. And so I would say, like, in someone's body, everyone can feel, right, when they're holding something, sure, like they're holding resentment, they're holding some kind of emotional turmoil. Well, then it'll cause our body to start holding as well. And I found, just on this note, and I think it'll be of a lot of value to people, as I've gone through my interpersonal journey, I realized that I was holding on to a lot of baggage, holding on to a lot of broken dreams and resentment. And that was also causing me to contract. And Chinese medicine talks about this. That caused me to contract digestively. And I had to work both avenues together to heal my heart, if you will, and also to heal my body. But back to your question, I think, like 3 times a day on average, you're doing, and when you feel light, right? You feel like you're not backed up.
That's great. You touched on something there. So, and I'm going to come back to it in a second. So we've had hydration, dealing with digestion. One more thing, would you say, like a critical factor if someone's getting started on that journey or want to go to the next level towards activating their human health potential?
Okay, so once they've gotten on water, like what's the next kind of step to, if they have like a digestive issue per se?
Well, let's say we've covered digestion. So let's look at look at the next area.
Okay, cool. So from my perspective, I would say start introducing organic living food into your diet. And so for me, what that looks like is fresh fruits and vegetables, soaked and sprouted nuts and seeds, sprouts like grass sprouts, fermented foods, like that category right there, and green vegetable juices. Like if somebody starts to integrate those categories of food and just replace what they do already and just introduce like one green leafy salad a day and have it topped up with some kind of fermented vegetables and, some good healthy raw fats like avocado or olives or cold pressed extra virgin olive oil as a dressing instead of like the traditional ranch dressing that's loaded up with 10 preservatives and is pasteurized and homogenized, and it might glow in the dark if you test it.
So basically we're talking, start with the water, get your digestion figured out. Have a, kind of like a big leafy green salad or whatever that attraction. And you touched on one thing in your own journey when you were pounding these mega smoothies. How important do you think that was for your journey of where you are today? Obviously, you exude an outstanding level of health. So how was important what's that?
Yeah, well, it actually goes back to something you had mentioned to me many years ago in the first interview we did together for my podcast way back when. And you were talking about how the body has to almost like acclimatize or has to acclimate to plant-based protein. Right, we were talking about from like a bodybuilding perspective, and that statement always stuck with me. It just made so much sense. It's like, yeah, that's really the crux of the matter, is that people have challenges on vegetarian and vegan diets a lot of times because it's not because meat has more protein or better protein or anything like that. It's because people haven't acclimated to the plant-based proteins. And so your advice in that interview was to have somebody start doing 2, 3, maybe even 4 times like a plant-based powdered protein in their smoothies. And I think that really goes to the root of it, is that somehow my intuition was just telling me, and my excitement was just telling me, like, load up, play with this, immerse yourself, go full on into this and find out what it will do to you. Because I just wanted to find out what would happen. Would I become superhuman if I downed a bottle of marine phytoplankton? Like,
I love
it. So that was kind of my logic. And then eventually just natural inclination took over. My body just started to like kind of shift into this model of like intermittent fasting. However, I don't know that I could have made that radical of a shift if I didn't saturate myself completely before.
Yeah, I think a lot of people get the idea that somehow that they can starve their way to another level of health, and then they end up in a very restricted, the initial benefits of reducing maybe a toxic diet, and then all of a sudden they assume that just reducing is going to get them where you want to go. But I've noticed a pattern, and maybe you can concord with this, is that people who have experienced super health number one, they tend to be extreme by nature, and I think you'd say you're extreme.
Totally. Yeah.
Number two, they kind of go through a lot of the restrictions and experiments, and then there's a stage where they just kind of like consume information and products and herbs, and there's kind of almost like a loading phase, and then and then you kind of go through a refinement phase. Would that be fair assessment that you've noticed?
I think that is a spot on accurate. That's exactly what I think. We go through the cycles and seasons, right? So like our biology has a season, it has a cycle to it. Our hormones have a cycle. Our just, nature obviously has a cycle and season. I think our own inner nature of inquisitiveness, of curiosity, and of wanting to learn and apply information or things that we're excited about, we go through cyclical processes. So there is that phase where you're like super excited about something new and you're just immersing yourself and you're borderline obsessing about it, but you're passionate about it, right? So you're just taking everything in like a sponge. And then there becomes like a saturation point where you've reached a limit of like, I don't know if it's practicality or sensibility or just like it's almost like, okay, we need to integrate everything that we've taken in and start putting it into practice and just see what happens. So our conviction isn't just based on theory. It's not just based on enthusiasm, but we can actually draw from our own experience. And as someone who wanted to be and is now a public figure, I knew that I would have to be a symbol for my message. I would have to be the best role model for my particular message. And that meant that I couldn't just talk about things because I read it in a book, although that's kind of part of it intellectually. I had to experience it. I had to know this viscerally and embody it. Otherwise, this wasn't going to work. So for me, I think it just took that natural maturity. I just had to actually mature through the information and through my own vision until I realized like, okay, there's an ebb and flow. Like right now I'm in study student mode, soak it all up. And then it's like, okay, I've matured with this information or this amount of food, as the case may be. And now I want to explore more subtle energies. I want to explore intermittent fasting. I want to explore how to turn my body into a free energy generating device where I don't need tons of input to get maximum output. I want to see what's possible within my this amazing instrument.
That's a whole topic on itself. I know we'll revisit that probably in another podcast. What are some mistakes or your biggest mistakes that you think you've made along the way, or that you've noticed students make along the way?
Specifically in terms of like my health.
Yeah, like
lifestyle.
maybe just things that you look back now and it's I always use the term, it seemed like a good idea at the time, but that ended up being a fail. And there's no real fail, but it was an experiment that didn't produce the result that we thought it might.
I would say for me, it's having an addictive personality. I think there might be a better way of phrasing that, but that's the common term. Is when we are extreme, a lot of times we have addictive patterns, and it's not like addiction in the way that I am not in control. It's that I am seeking pleasure, I'm avoiding pain, right? So. Okay, something that feels really pleasurable. I'll say this, and I don't talk about that often, but when I got into coffee, thank you, Dave Asprey, for that. I've departed from that kind of thing. I'm so happy to say. Right. But it was really interesting when I got into it because I never drank coffee before. I was like totally opposed to coffee. It was like totally toxic. It was that whole story. And then I got into it because my buddy Hoy gives me a call and he's just like, dude, have you heard about this biohacking and there's coffee with butter and this whole thing. And so I came over and I tried it and we were just freaking out. We're like, oh my God, like this is the most amazing. And then we're like, oh, let's put herbs into it. Like they're not doing that. Let's put like tonic herbs in. And then it became kind of an experiment. But what ended up happening is that I definitely got really excessive about it to the point where I would be doing it behind closed doors, I wouldn't be talking about it. I'd be talking about something else, but I would also be drinking coffee through the day. And yeah, it was definitely an experiment. And that would be something that I would caution to people that are super excited, that do have a little bit of an extreme or even addictive type of tendency, is that you just get to the point where you know your limits and you're willing to abstain from seeking pleasure if it starts to biologically bankrupt you. Like my serotonin and dopamine receptors were definitely starting to receive compromise. I was experiencing a little bit of adrenal fatigue. And I did, but the biggest mistake wasn't those things. The mistake was how do you say? It was not paying attention to
Right.
what was that life was obviously trying to tell me, and then other people would start telling me, and it just took me a long time to really own up to that fact.
You talk about a couple things, neurotransmitters and fatigue or adrenal fatigue that was showing up. And did this show up? When did this show up? And I don't want to put words in your mouth. Did this correlate with the coffee drinking? Did you feel?
For sure. Sure. I'm not going to say it wasn't because of coffee. But there is a definite correlation.
When did that show up for you? Like, if you could explain that journey, because there's a lot of people on this one, and I think it's a big one.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I told someone yesterday, I think, is he was kind of shaming himself about drinking coffee. And I just kind of told him, I was like, well, first of all, if you're going to do something, then do it like it's holy. Like if you're going to do it, then don't create an acidic environment in your body and in your soul, and then do it, because then you're going to create identity conflicts within yourself. So that was one. But then I also said, and another thing, when it gets to the point where you feel like you need the coffee, that's the point where you need to pull back. If it's something that's pleasurable, you enjoy it, and you don't have a jitteriness, you feel like it's just like an enhancement and it's fun, awesome, cool, have at it. But to the point where it gets where you feel like you need it to function, and it's like you're not happy by nature, and you need that stimulation to get your dopamine pathways back online and to feel good and to focus and that kind of thing, that's when you're going into a deficit. So and that's what happened to me.
That's a great point. And that's going to be a different journey for different people depending on where they are, what's their supportive stuff. And like, some people can kind of get away with things for a long time. Some people have zero tolerance. But you define that with that particular point, when you feel that you need X to be happy, would you say that could be applied to a lot of things? Would you say that?
I was just thinking that when you said it, I was like, and that could apply to almost anything.
Wow. That's the golden nugget of the day right there. I want to pause for a second, let people let that in. When you think that you need something X, whatever that is, to feel happy and normal, then you've kind of slipped past optimization. You've gone over the board and you went to addiction. That would be the red line.
Yeah.
And that would apply to almost, like, have you seen this in other areas of your life at any time?
Every area of my life. I look at life holographically. There's a great book that landed on my bookshelf a while ago called The Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot.
I've read that book. It's an amazing book.
Absolutely. And so one of the interesting kind of views on reality that I use life as a reference for what's going on internally and how I'm affecting the whole, and the whole is affecting the micro, being me. And so from that perspective, in the obvious ways it shows up is like in sex and not even just sex, quote unquote, addictions, but intimacy, like needing somebody else to fill a void, needing that touch or that camaraderie or that intimacy. Like that's a huge one. I've struggled with that. Anyone that knows me well knows that I'm happy to share. And I'm sure later in my career, I'll probably focus more attention as I'm in a relationship and maybe start a family. I'll talk more about that. But that's one that I definitely have felt a lot of self-induced suffering around. And I've seen how that's led to things like excessive tobacco or excessive No, I don't drink alcohol, but for other people, excessive alcohol or food addictions. Really what it comes down to me, Wade, if you want to chunk it down, is about all the ways that we avoid ourselves and we medicate and sedate our emotions so we don't have to feel the pain that really just wants to be felt and acknowledged, so we can actually get back to what it is to be really happy and really joyful without needing an exterior stimulant to temporarily feel those states.
Wise words. So we're coming up on the top of the hour, so I want to hit a couple of quick bullets, and you can just like try and keep the answer real short. Like it'll be just like most influential person in your health career.
I'll just say David Wolf.
Most interesting field that you're studying right now in health.
Calcification and nanobacteria.
Newest health practice that you're doing now.
I'm awaiting my Neurophone and my Sensor V pendant from Dr. Patrick Flanagan. So I would actually that I'll keep it short, but not neuro hacking, but neuro optimization is my primary focus now, because I need to activate genius. You know, the world needs us. I got to get on the game here. So
it's a great machine. I have one, and Patrick is a good friend of mine. He actually edited a part of my book, which is awesome, on water of all things.
I saw that. I read that book. That's an incredible book on water.
Thanks. Thing that makes you most happy related to your health?
Oh, yeah. See if I can find the words. I can feel the state. It's like, it's a state of grace. It's when I feel so clear in my mind. There's nothing inducing it. I just feel clear. I feel free and like levitational in my body and my joints and my digestion. Like my body feels optimal and I'm just in a state of grace. That's
a great one. Favorite health food?
Man, that's a tough one. I love chocolate.
That's a good one.
I love cacao. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's it.
Durian fruit. This is it. Real quick. Coconut, durian, cacao, honey smoothie.
That sounds pretty good. I want to go have one right now. Most influential book towards your career?
There's a few coming up, but there's, if I had to say one book, the one that always comes to mind is As a Man Thinketh by James Allen.
Okay, and most influential health book, because that's kind of, it is a health book on one level, it's how you think, but what would you say from a health perspective?
I would say The Sun Food Diet Success System by David Wolf, because when that came out, that became the tome on living food nutrition and the overall lifestyle and the beautiful visual. It was like the first thing that tapped me into like an expanded artistic vision of what this was about. That's the moment it no longer became a diet and it became like a purpose. So that book has had the most influence on the way I think about it.
Most underappreciated health science and you think? I
would say water. I mean, because like you mentioned, it's like so obvious. It's so stupid simple. It's opaque. All water looks like the same thing. And people believe that they know something about water, you know, where we're just finding out that it's the most anomalous thing ever. But as we mentioned before, it's the most integral aspect of the human biology. And it's also something that's so maligned in so many different ways. And I think so from that perspective, when I think of underappreciated, I think water is underappreciated.
Great answer. Weirdest health thing you've ever done?
Well, I got, when I was at this healing retreat in Texas, I was the only one at this retreat the whole time, and I was teaching there. And then there was a colon hydrotherapy, an open system that you can modulate yourself, and they left the door open. So when everyone would go home, I would sneak in and I would give myself self-administered colonics. And I did about like 10 in a couple weeks.
Wow.
It was like, I won't do that again. But that right there, I think that's one of the tops for sure.
Most fun health practice that you in the past or present?
Oh. Well, I definitely associate fun as like activity, something in motion, right? So when I'm in that state of freedom physically and mentally, then what I would say, I guess, is some form of like physical activity, like sprinting up a hill. I'll just tell you what I did yesterday. I was 2 days ago over here in Kauai. I went to the Hanakape Falls, which is this majestic 4-mile hike up through the mountains into the bamboo forest, up through hopping across rivers, and you're in this real jungle. And then I turn a corner and there's this massive waterfall staring at me. I have pictures of it I'll share, but this massive waterfall, and I felt so good in my body and my spirit and my mind because I was healthy enough to get there. I jumped into the big body. I mean, if just look it up for people. If you're considering going to Kauai, this is something you have to do once in your life. I jumped into the ice cold water, swam underneath the waterfall, and just basked in the glory of it. And I'd say, that's what comes to mind. I think over everything, that moment in ice cold water, swimming in ice cold water, I think is one of the most powerful things that I do that actually brings me joy.
This is an awesome experience. I've kind of went there in my mind. What's your daily routine look like today that allows you to kind of live the vibrancy that you're living?
Yeah. So a typical day for me right now, because I've traveled around so much, it kind of forms itself to my environment. And so right now, what it typically will look like is I'll wake up, somewhere between maybe 5 and 6. I will drink a liter of water, half a liter water. I'll do 1 tablespoon of activated charcoal, and I'll mix that with another glass of water. I'll throw that back. I'll take maybe 20 proteolytic BiOptimizers enzymes. By the way, those are the only enzymes I really care to use at this point. And I'll just whatever little supplements I'm playing with at the time, Qualia, Neurohacker, or whatever, I like to play around with these things. But then from there, I'll probably read, I'll meditate for at least 30 minutes, 10 to 20 or 30 minutes, depending on the day. I'll read a little bit because I feel like Jim Rohn left us with a great quote, which was, skip a meal, but don't ever skip your reading. And I really feel like that's an underappreciated nutrition for the mind. And then I'll go work out. I'll go to the gym. I'll lift weights. I'll power through a workout and then go to the beach maybe. That's a general flow, but from there I typically will go right into work mode around 9:30 or 10 and jam out on the computer, do whatever I need to do interviews, work with clients. The days are all structured a little differently, but that's how I start my day.
Great. And how would you unwind at the end of the day? And when would that day kind of slow down?
Okay. Yeah. I don't know if I ever unwind. It's kind of like I heard John DeMartini recently. I just had him on my podcast and we were talking about this idea of like, what do you do to chill out? And he's like, I don't chill out. I'm living my purpose. I don't need to chill out. Like I'm just fully in it. And so that's kind of my answer. But, from a physical standpoint, around maybe 6 or 7, it's like dinner, right? Like eating a salad, and then I might watch a documentary or something that's either stimulating or not stimulating. It's just something I'm just kind of chilling out doing, and reading or something. Like I find for me, I way rather be fully engaged in my life and in my path and my purpose in everything I do, which is why I can't date anymore. I just realized that recently. I realized like I just cannot date anymore. It's done. That part of my life is over. I'll wait for my wife to show up, but like it's because it's just such a distraction, because like my purpose is calling me 24/7. And that might sound overwhelming to a lot of people, but I guess what I'm saying is that when you love what you do and you find a way to make your work play, you'll never work another day. So although yes, it is hard work, but it doesn't feel like it. It feels like I'm really fulfilling my purpose on the planet. And it helps me actually get to sleep better, because I don't have these thoughts or these concerns that are keeping me up all night.
How much do you sleep at night?
Ideally, I'd like to get to the point where I'm only sleeping 4 hours, but I'm no longer forcing that process. I hope just eventually it gets to that point. But right now it's between 6 and 8 hours.
That's an amazing array of information. You got a great day. Any final words that you'd like to share with our listeners that are looking to activate Awesome Health, and also will check into, how to get a hold of you, where to reach you, all that sort of stuff. So,
yes. So I have a book that's about to release mid-May called The Inner Alchemy Youthening Program. And I'm actually looking at the proof copy on my computer screen. I'm totally blown away. And one of the things that I focused in on that book that I'm looking at right now, or before this interview, was this idea that your level of vitality is directly correlated to your congruency in life. So your thoughts, words, and actions all in alignment create, like, almost like if you can imagine in your chakra system, the flow of energy in your body, there's dams that dam up that flow. And a lot of it is because of incongruent thoughts, incongruent emotional patterns that keep us out of harmony with what we're here to do on the planet. And so from that standpoint, I really believe that the greatest thing we can do for our health is identify what our path and mission on the planet is, and then to come into alignment, to actually give ourselves to it, however that is revealed, whether that's just revealed through like being nice to people and smiling opposed to frowning, right? And just being courageous enough to be happy. And then if it reveals itself even more as like this mission, then having the courage and the faith to know that that's not by accident, and you can give yourself to it, and your life will work better. And I feel like nutrition is like an amplifier to that, but it's not a substitute. We can't really truly be vitally healthy if we're confused if we're cosmically illiterate, right? We don't know what we're doing here on the planet, but we're eating the best food. So, and I've seen that play out. You've seen that play out. We've all seen that play out in our subculture, where people are medicating themselves through the best food ever, but they're internally not aligned. So I hope that answers
really, really wise words and great things to part with. How do we find you? Where are you on the WW waves? You got any? How do we access?
Yeah. So my personal website is ronnielandis.net, and that's my platform that has my podcast on it. It has tons of like free media, free content. And then you can access my online courses that way. My main flagship course, as we mentioned, is the Holistic Health Mastery Program, which is holistichealthmastery.com. And if any of this really piques someone's interest and they're looking to achieve a certain level of mastery in their health, in their career, maybe they're inspired to be a health coach or something like that, then I would just invite them to go to that website and just check it out. And if it feels right to you, then reach out or enroll. Just go with what feels correct. And then other than that, YouTube, type my name in. I have a YouTube channel, Facebook, Instagram.
That's great. We'll include all those for our listeners in the show notes. Ronnie, it's great to have you on the show. I'm really delighted that you took the time out of your day in beautiful Kauai to join us today. You dropped some real great wisdom for our listeners. I know that some of them are probably going to jump in on your course and take advantage of all the wisdom that you've accumulated and put down. You really poured your heart out of that. It's an amazing course. Thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it that you came out here to the Awesome Health podcast show, and I do believe that you will be on again in the very near future. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Wade. My pleasure.
And now for a BiOptimizers fixed digestion tip: how to get away with eating sugar. Hey, look, sugar is normally one of the worst things for you. But let's be honest. I mean, we all cheat from time to time. And here's a little trick that will ensure your body benefits from the sugar. Now, before you eat or drink anything sweet, take 5 to 8 capsules of P3OM. The patented strain in the formula devours sugar so fast it literally doubles in the body every 20 minutes in the presence of sugar. That doesn't mean that you can or you should eat a bunch of sugar or sit around all day doing that. But on the days that you do cheat, or you go after one of those maybe meals that you wouldn't normally do, this ensures that you get something in your gut that eats the sugar. And it's not going to feed the bad guys or spike your blood glucose nearly as much. So to learn more about P3OM and its sugar-devouring and protein-digesting properties and how it can transform your gut and metabolism, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
Thank you for listening to the BiOptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.